Okay, and I am already recording also. Let me just double check. Yes, I am recording. All right, all good.
Enjoying a glass of wine from the finest of boxes tonight. My wine box cellar. Okay. Anyway, um, so Allison, feel free to kick off the introduction, and then we'll just have a conversation. We'll try
Oh,
to.
I'm reading the introduction? Okay.
Did you write it? Oh, you wrote it up on Evernote.
Yeah. Yeah, it's on Evernote.
Okay, let me just grab that. I can start.
Okay. It's real short.
Just says, here's John Tenney.
And here's Johnny.
King of the Andals and the First Men.
That's not it.
Okay.
It just says John Tenney outline. There's nothing in it but like 2 lines.
No, I know.
We're going to make up the rest.
Evernote's,
I got a ton of questions.
I know. We have plenty to talk about here, and we don't
Yeah.
want to waste John's time.
Do you have questions? Do you have questions written down?
No, I usually do, but I was sick. I'm sorry.
We're gonna
just wing it.
Yeah,
we're already
wing it.
We're already running him through the tech support 3-ring circus
Nightmare.
here, so then we'll just get into it. Okay, so recording now, Allison. You're recording on your side.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Joining Allison and I tonight is John Tenney, weirdo extraordinaire, paranormal expert, spellbinding storyteller, and supernatural shamus who runs weirdlectures.com. He joins us today to talk about the recent shocking UFO news that appeared in the New York Times this weekend. John, all the way from Michigan, welcome to see you on the other side.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. Okay, so for the people that haven't heard you or been to your website or checked out one of your lectures or seen you at a paranormal convention yet, what's your quick elevator pitch? Like, how did you get it to be a professional weirdo?
Oh, it's not quick, but I'll try and condense it as much as possible. When I was 16, I was a gopher for my mentor, who was a specialist in political assassinations of the 1960s and 70s. So RFK, JFK, MLK, Malcolm X, Black Panthers, all of them. And as I assisted him with his research and learning how to deal with the government, I became, to make it as short as possible, I became more interested in the kind of underlying octopus that seemed to connect all these weird conspiracies. And when you would read about secret government organizations, you end up reading about UFOs, you end up reading about mind control, ghosts, experiments with hallucinogens, all of this type of stuff. And I was like, well, maybe I should track where my heart is telling me to go. You know, Craig, my mentor, his was assassinations and mine was the weirder stuff. And so by the time 1990 came around, I was doing what I was calling weird lectures, because I felt like if I was, at one time I had lectures that were, okay, this is a conspiracy lecture, this is a ghost lecture, this is a cryptozoology lecture. But then I found myself kind of locked into only being able to talk about that one issue. And that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted people to do, I've said it for a long time, I've wanted people to diversify their weirdness. And so if I want to talk about ghosts and how it relates to UFOs and how it relates to cryptids and how it relates to folklore, like, I should just do weird lectures. And then I worked for Unsolved Mysteries in the 90s and on a bunch of weird shows in the late 90s. And then, of course, as everybody knows, in the 2000s, reality shows hit with paranormal. And here I was, I'd already had, at that time, 15 years experience. And so the network started tapping me to do research. And then here we are now, almost 30 years later, and I'm still trying to figure all of this crap out.
Well, I'm really excited to talk to you today because, as you alluded to there, you really make a lot of connections between these seemingly disparate phenomena. And so, I think that's what we really need to try to figure out what might be going on. So if we could just jump right in, what do you think is going on with this news of late from the New York Times, which basically outs a program going on from 2007 till at least 2012, although some argue that it's still going on right now. A Pentagon funded program looking into UFOs. Only $22 million went into it, which is not a lot when you're talking about defense spending.
Like that's the
But
Pentagon wallpaper budget, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's nothing. It's really nothing.
right. But what is something is that they were looking into cases that have been that have impacted the military, that have been reported by military pilots. So, this isn't the stereotypical, which is really, stereotypes are vile, but, the idea of some farmer out in his field, some local Yahoo who, sees something. These are trained pilots who can't explain what they've seen.
Right. It's not just
So,
some jackass in the middle of Wisconsin looking up at the sky going, hey,
yeah.
what's that there?
Not
Well,
that they can,
well,
they can have violent sightings also, but
you know what? To start, before we get really deep into the New York Times, what's interesting is that, when you were, Alice, when you were about to say not to, and you went to farmer in a field, like
right.
the reason that we all think that is because in the 1970s, the Department of Defense sent out a little memo to the three major networks. There were only real, ABC, NBC, and CBS at the time. And because of this huge sighting that had happened in 1966 in Michigan, they sent out a little memo to the three news channels and said, like, it would be most beneficial for your network and your advertisers if you are going to do an unidentified flying object or flying saucer story to not interview anyone that has above a high school education. And so throughout the 1970s and early 80s, the only people that you saw on television reporting UFOs were the kind of uneducated masses. And so that's the idea. Even to this day now, 30 some odd years later, we jokingly say like a farmer in a field, a wacko in Wisconsin. And that was, again, driven by the government and its use of the media. So now we're in another area right now, which I've always said during my lectures, paranormal phenomena and supernatural phenomena, it's because of the way our society is very cyclical. So in the 90s, when X-Files was on, the UFO community was exploding. Like, it was everywhere. Everyone was researching UFOs. There were tons of UFO documentaries, Bob Lazar and the Aviary, and there was all of this stuff going on, the Benowitz files.
Alien autopsy.
Alien autopsy. It was exploding. Disclosure was imminent. You had all of these people coming together, doing press releases at the United Press Corps in Washington, D.C., and then it died. And then all of a sudden there were ghost shows. And then for 10 years, ghost shows exploded and everybody's hunting ghosts. And this happens over and over again. And then ghosts die off, cryptids come in, Bigfoot and Mothman blows up like crazy. And now as that waxes down, here comes UFOs again. And I've watched this happen since the 1980s. It's just circular. People's attention spans, I mean, it was longer before because people seem to have a longer attention span. So it was taking 10 years for this to cycle through. Now it's only taking, a year or 2 years to recycle back to the next weird thing until a generation gets sick of it, tired of it. They don't think about it anymore. Now we can move back to ghosts. Now we can move back to Bigfoot. Now we can move back to UFOs.
Wow, what a perspective. Yeah, so I mean, you are saying to us that, that whole stereotype that we have was engineered by the government using the media as a tool. And so that's really interesting, especially since, doing a little bit of, reading on my own in the field, I know that there's been surveys done of pilots. And there are many, many reports of UFOs or, unidentified aerial phenomena is now the more fashionable term, that have been seen by pilots for decades. And so I think it's interesting now, the distinction now is that the New York Times comes out and says, hey, it's not a wacko from Wisconsin, it's military pilots. So could you speak to that distinction a little bit? Because, and releasing, for the government to release some official footage, of a UFO, ostensibly.
I don't think it means as much as people believe it to mean. So even to a certain degree, there are laws, local and state laws that before I get into all that, there are local and state laws which allow and disallow certain professions to even talk about the fact that they've seen UFOs. So if you're a commercial airline pilot and you see a UFO, if you report that, you have to undergo psychological testing. You can have your license revoked. So you just don't report it. It's the same thing with a lot of police officers and law enforcement officials. If you report an unidentified flying object, you have to go in for psych evaluations. You have to talk to internal affairs. So police people don't talk about it, you know? So it does seem like a big deal when someone who's in an official position comes forward and says, yes, this stuff might be real. But I know the reason I don't think it's big news is because they have always done that. You know, we found out about, Project Sign and Project Grudge, which were started in the mid to early 40s, because Edward Ruppelt, who was a military official, said, we're studying UFOs. And there was footage that they released that they couldn't identify. And, even though their footage was taken from an amateur, it was still footage that was vetted by the government, and they released it and said, we don't know what this is. And then, like I said, the 50s, 60s come around, it kind of gets lost, people forget about it. The 70s comes back around, now here's a little bit more footage, now this person says this over here. And so this is just more of, I really feel it's like more of the same. It's just a way to either make people look in a different direction about what's going on politically or socially in the country, or sometimes things leak out, and it doesn't just mean that something great is coming. Sometimes information just comes out. For your listeners, if I can, just a real brief history, because people are like, well, oh my gosh, the government is studying this. So for your listeners who aren't well versed in UFO lore, right? So you have Roswell in 47. In 1948, the United States government creates Project Sign to investigate UFOs, government sanctioned. Sign is stopped in 1949. It becomes Project Grudge. Grudge goes on until 1950. Blue Book goes from 1952 and ends in 1970. So, I don't think people realize that it went on that long. Mm-hmm. So we know for a fact that they're interested in stuff. And then when Project Blue Book ended in 1970, there was a brigadier general named General Bullard who said in the final closing statements of like, we're shutting down Blue Book. And then his last comment is, we'll continue to take reports and investigate them. So even though he's closing down the official project, he's still saying we're still interested in this. We're still going to look into it. And so there's no doubt that they have had stuff going. People are just crazy right now because they're like, oh, they admitted to doing it. They've admitted a number of times that they've funded money into stuff that was quote unquote weird. And so this isn't really a big new thing. Even aside from UFOs, if you look at all of the weird stuff that the government has funded research into. So you have Blue Book ending in 1970. But in 1970, what else is going on is starting in 1953, you had the government doing MK Ultra, which was mind control experiments on soldiers. MK Ultra went until 1973. And then, in 1978, you've got Project Stargate, where the government is looking into remote viewing and psychic powers of people. And then that whole, Project Stargate, which became Project Sunstreak, that went into 1985. So the government is always looking at this stuff. They do have interest in it because we have interest in it. And they want to know if there's something there that's weaponizable, if there's somewhere there they can make money off it. That's the other thing about that New York Times article. We're looking at technology and alloys and recovered, like it's going to be used to make money. So if it can be used to make money, like we're going to investigate it and figure out who can be in control of that thing that's going to make money.
Right, because, in the article, that was one of the things that jumped out in one of the articles. That was one of the things that jumped out at me was that there were certain buildings, modified to hold recovered parts, essentially.
Yeah, and we don't know what that means by modified. They might have just, by modification, they might have just built a Faraday cage inside of it so that
Oh
People
yeah.
couldn't leak, but that's it. Like that's all the modifications they could have, or put bigger locks on the doors. We don't know
Yeah.
what that means by modification.
Right. It doesn't mean
Right.
force fields.
The
Right.
significance is that, essentially it seems like they're saying we have pieces of alien craft that we've been studying.
Or they have pieces of top secret technology from other countries that they've been studying.
And that's what I was going to think about here. Because is there any particular reason, like, you know, one of the things we talked about in our first conversation with Robbie Graham in his book, The Silver Screen Saucers, was about the idea that, the CIA wanted us to believe in Area 51 because the idea of that we are weaponizing alien technology is the idea is to to scare the nesting dolls right out of the Soviets. And so if we have this kind of tech, from space, it's going to be terrifying. And so that's why they wanted us to they want us to believe that kind of narrative. Now, what kind of narrative could be construed from the release of this today, besides the fact that Harry Reid wanted to give the price of a mid-level, film to his buddy in the Bigelow Tech?
I mean, it might just be that, right? Like it could just be guys dealing with their buddies and saying, "Listen, I can get you 22 million." Like no one's going to blink an eye at it because it is the wallpaper, budget for the Pentagon. Those earlier government projects that I was talking about, like MK Ultra. MK Ultra in 1953 had a $10 million budget. So adjusted for today's dollars, that's $85 million that they were spending a year on MK Ultra. So now you come up into our day and age, and they're like, this is $22 million. And people really do. There's a lot of people who act surprised at that number. They think it's a huge number. They don't realize the black budget of the Pentagon is hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. And so that $22 million could easily just be, oh, you're interested in UFOs, I'm interested in UFOs, I can get you this 22 million, do what you want. So what's important to find out like what the motivations might be about it is, since it is taxpayer money, since it's now been disclosed, and I posted a thing about this, I think, on Twitter, and I think I even wrote to Allison about it. But, the first thing I did was I immediately started writing Freedom of Information Act requests, because they're openly talking about it in the news. They've told us the people that are involved. They've told us the budget that's involved, which is taxpayer money. It's all funded through taxpayer things like the Department of Defense and the Defense Intelligence agencies. I need to write FOIA because all of these reports that were mentioned in the New York Times article, those are ours. We paid for them. So if they're willing to discuss them openly, if they're willing to send the reporters and the people and Bigelow and everybody out into the news sphere to do interviews on CNN and MSNBC and all of the news channels, you should have no problem with giving me the reports that you created with the money that we gave them to fund this thing with. And so people should be writing FOIA requests like mad right now, like not just reading. I mean, those are your documents. Everybody that's listening to this paid for those reports to be made.
That's absolutely
Well, I
right.
teach fourth grade, and I think I should get my fourth graders on it.
Absolutely.
I'm serious. I mean, I joke, but I am serious because I do my best to get them involved in government at as early an age as possible. And this is something that we should all know how to do.
Do you think at 11 years old, though, they can handle the truth?
I think they can.
You know what's great is that if you go to weirdlectures.com and go to the search box and search FOIA, FOIA, you can copy and paste. There's a template for a FOIA request, and you can plug in what you want to look for. And you could give that to your students and tell them, what do you think the government might know something about? And they can each write in that little blank spot what they want to. Do they want to know about UFOs, or do they want to know about submarines? Like anything they want to know about, they can ask the government, send me the information about it. And it's a letter that they can send and put one stamp on it, and they'll get a letter back from the government, either saying, yes, here it is, or we're taking on an advisement. I mean, it's a really cool thing for a kid to have.
Yeah, I'm doing it.
A letter from the FBI or from the Department of Defense, and like, oh, someone in the government is doing something.
Even though mostly it's going to be like, why aren't Kit Kats in the food pyramid?
No, no. I mean, they're pretty astute, but yeah, we've been doing a lot of work with our local government. So this would be a cool, way to segue them into federal government. So I'm definitely doing that. Thank you for. I'm excited about the template,
And
but
you should tell them too, though. I mean, this is the other thing for your listeners and your students is to know that, okay, so they might get some documents, they might get a rejection letter saying that we don't have anything about what but then they also might get a letter that says, we're looking for your request and it might take some time. So like I have Craig, my mentor, and we filed Freedom of Information Act requests for Kennedy files. Now, they had that big Kennedy dump where it was all the
Mm.
files that they ever had on Kennedy. Craig and I still have not gotten responses from some of our FOIA requests that we filed back in 1986 and 1987. They keep sending us letters every 3 or 4 months saying it's still under advisement. We're still looking for it. Uh, so, I mean, they do have stuff that they won't release. I mean, that's the other thing you have to look at too. And then why won't they release it?
yeah, those are all compelling questions. I mean, okay, so you mentioned, hey, the 22 million, maybe it was like some kind of deal between friends. But, I do know that, Robert Bigelow, the billionaire who is involved in, the study of of these, materials, and, they've also interviewed witnesses, and done medical studies about their exposure to the UFOs, and then interviewed pilots. So that they did do some work regarding that. And I know that Robert Bigelow, he's been into this subject for decades, so he's not a newcomer. And people who aren't familiar with the subject might not know his name, but I've heard his name for years, and he owns Skinwalker Ranch, where he's been doing experiments there, and some of the high strangeness that's been experienced at that location. But also before that, he had the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIDS, and that was an organization that he ran to explore this kind of stuff, and he financed it all on his own, and that ran for a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right, that a billionaire needs $22 million from the government to investigate something that he's already been investigating for 30 years with all of his own money. And he needs this amount of money, which to a billionaire isn't, again, it's not very much.
Right.
So it really does seem at one kind of real low level where you have a billionaire who's interacting with senators and congressmen, which is mostly the only people who interact with senators and congressmen, right? And Bigelow says, I want to do UFOs, and so the senator gets him some appropriated money. This is what happens at every level of our government, except it's usually in the oil industry or the mining industry or the coal or the other technology industries. Like it's a billionaire saying to a senator, I need some money to investigate this. And
Yeah.
then I can use the fact that the government's, providing me funds for it to kind of push our agenda. And so the other thing we're not talking about either is DeLong into the stars, right? So
Yeah.
uh, he's all wrapped up in this too. And the
So
thing
give
is
a little background to the listeners
so
about Tom
so
DeLonge
Tom
and To the
Tom De,
Stars.
yeah, so Tom DeLong is, was a member of Blink 182, still is or whatever, and has all of a sudden in the past, I would say, I mean, so Blink 182 people will say he's always been interested in UFOs, which is fine. I completely believe he's always been interested in UFOs. People have been, but when people say I'm a lifelong UFO investigator, like when did you really start investigating? Not reading the first book about UFOs and watching documentaries, which is what a lot of people do. And so maybe in the past 5 or 6 years, maybe 7 years, all of a sudden Tom DeLonge has burst onto the scene saying, I'm going to create this organization called To the Stars. We're going to do disclosure. We're going to show alien technology, and we're going to bring it all to the forefront. Now, again, I have to be wary of this because it's cyclical. Like I've seen people do this before. This happened with, like I said, the Benowitz affair. If people go and Google that, or you look at what Bob Lazar and when Area 51 was in its prime in 1994, There's all these people who show up and they have all of these real lofty goals of disclosure. Greer has been in the midst of disclosure now for 30 years. Like, Stephen Greer has
Yeah.
been about to disclose alien technology for 30 years.
He's on his own timeline.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
And his own planet.
Yeah, and so DeLong.
Sorry.
So
Little editorial comment there.
So DeLong shows up, 5 or 6 years ago, says, I'm going to do disclosure. And now this is happening. Of course, he's aligned. He's a millionaire, a multimillionaire,
right.
Who is friends with a billionaire who, if I was a millionaire, I would have a lot of billionaire friends too. And I'm sure one of those billionaire friends would probably be Bigelow, because you run in that circle when you have that amount of money. When you're a rock star with hundreds of millions of dollars and you own a lot of stock, I mean, people don't really understand that Tom DeLonge didn't make most of his money through stock or make it through his band. He made it through like his parents' corporation that he invested, all of his rock band money into. And he's a money guy who happens to be in a punk rock band. So, I mean, it's wealthy families dealing with each other. I would have, like I said, I would have those connections too. Your listeners would have those connections if we were huge money men like that.
Well, hang on a second, John. Could you speak a little bit about, because there was a Rockefeller involved too. I forgot his name exactly, but yeah, but until his death, he was very interested in UFOs as well. So, there have been moneyed people interested in UFOs before.
Yeah, and that's not like crazy, right? Because you have not only you have people who are interested in UFOs. It's an interesting subject. And some of them are going to be millionaires because people are interested in UFOs, and some people happen to be millionaires. So you are going to get rich people who are invested and interested in UFOs, flying saucers, even Bigfoot and ghosts. Like, that's just going to happen. But it doesn't.
How can we get them to be our patrons? That's the real question.
I mean, it's the same way of saying, like, what you literally just said is, how can we get them to give us their money? Rich people are rich because they don't give anyone their money.
That's right.
Okay, that's a good point. But, it's like, how do you get that gig? Like, to be in the National Institute of Discovery Science or to, work for Robert Bigelow investigating UFOs. I mean,
do you really want to be at the beck and call of an eccentric billionaire, Allison?
I'd like to try it for a while.
Just think about that. I mean, have you ever worked for like a weird boss who like
all the time,
right? Who makes you do weird stuff? It's like he needs his specific kind of coffee at 1 a.m.
All the green M&Ms and only green M&Ms.
Right. And well, actually, that Van Halen story, we'll have to tell the full story at one time. It's not as crazy as you think. Okay, but
no. The point.
But the idea is, like, would you want to work for an eccentric billionaire who's like, hey, Allison, you're going to be able to study UFOs, but at 2:30, I need you to rub my big toe with Vaseline. Like, that's the kind of life you got to lead.
Yeah. But the point is, we talk about the paranormal and how it's really sad that we don't have enough funding to do this full time. And, here are people who could fund you. And so,
what are they doing?
It's not TV.
What are they doing? These people who could fund themselves, what are they doing? They're asking the government for more money.
Yeah, Tom DeLonge is like a Kickstarter for his To the Stars Institute.
Yeah.
Like, he's got to ask the regular guy for $5 a piece when he can just take the royalties off that first Dude Ranch album or whatever and put those into it.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have a point, but my point is there is some money going from these people to the study, ostensibly to the study of these phenomena. And, I don't see that as a particularly bad thing. I mean, it's different than, having TV fund you, which is, they want certain things and you're not going to get any truth out of them. And maybe, it's a pipe dream to think you get any truth out of anybody. But I feel like I'm glad that at least someone's looking into it, or at least saying they are.
I'm glad that people are looking into it. I'm glad that people are spending money on it, that certain people are funding it, that taxpayers are obviously funding it. But I think what's interesting is that like you don't know if behind the scenes like what's actually going on. That's the way it is even what you were saying, Allison, with television, right? So it's like if someone did come to either of you and said, "Listen, we can fully fund your research into Bigfoot for 10 years. Like, what do you need? We'll give you $1 million a year for 10 years. But while you're doing it, you can't tell anyone about it. You, if anybody asks you about it, these are you have to get around it. You have to lie to everyone for 10 years. Do you take the money?
I think I do because
You do?
yeah, because I want to know personally.
Okay,
And
so there's
yeah,
no you don't there so the altruistic part of it is gone. So it's as long as you know, you're fine.
well, I don't
You
see any other alternative. I mean,
So you're doing all this great research, you're doing all of this fact finding, all of these studies and all these reports, and when you get up on stage because people ask you to lecture, you make stuff up because you're not allowed to talk about what you're doing. And when people ask you questions that are close to the answers that you're finding, you lie to their face and tell them they're wrong so that
yeah.
you can have some money and some satisfaction.
No, it's not the money. It's the, the knowing, the being able to do the research and being funded to, to be able to devote yourself to do the research. And it's sad. It would be sad if, you wouldn't be able to release that information, but, at least the research would be getting done in a sense, and you hope it's going to be released at some point.
Well, I take the money
If
because
you
I'm
don't,
a whore. Like, are you kidding?
well, we know that,
$1
Mike.
million a year, you $500,000 for research and $500,000 to party.
But
The other thing is too is you're gonna have to document every dollar that you spend. You're gonna
yeah,
have to show exactly where it's going to,
right.
and the ultimate reveal could be that at the end of 10 years, when you hand over your research, someone goes, "Thank you," and they throw it in a shredder, and no one ever sees it ever
Yeah.
again.
Yeah,
Well, that's the problem because drug dealers don't give receipts.
Right?
yeah. I mean, it's a quagmire. I'll give you that. But I'm just saying, having money to be able to do this full time. Uh, I mean, there's value in that rather than just trying to do whatever you can on weekends. So it's a Sophie's choice. What are you gonna do? But
Right?
I think the
so
idea, though, is that the truth, and here's what we're talking about in the greater scheme of things, I think, here. So you take something like this, and we get a little kernel of evidence from this government report or things that come out like, oh, yeah, we've been running this project we ran it for at least 5 years. We spent $22 million on it. And here's what we got. We got a grainy video. We've got a mysterious alloy. We have somebody to trot out in front of the public to say that, yeah, I saw a weird light in the sky, just like half the, jet pilots did in World War II. It's not like you haven't heard or seen an interview with a World War II pilot out there that hasn't been like, yeah, I saw something crazy in the sky when I was bombing the Jerry's. When they're talking about these things, like, we know that people have seen things. We know. So what's the point? Like, when we want to talk about the point of it is that there's some kind of kernel of truth or a story that's fed to us right now. And why is it being fed to us right now? And for what purpose? Like, is it to make us not look at the tax bill that's just been?
See, that's what I argue is like what you just said, right? So all of a sudden it's released, this information in the New York Times. Okay, there was a government study going on. The government funded the study. Here's a grainy video, and here's someone saying that we have a weird alloy and maybe some recovered technology. Okay, what did we have in the UFO community before the New York Times came? We knew that the government had been funding studies in the past and spending millions of dollars on it to study UFOs. We had tons of grainy footage. We had people who said they had alloys and recovered technology. Like, what did we gain? Like, the only thing that we learned is that, oh, it's not 15 years ago, it's 5 years ago. Like, that's all that was released. Like, that's the only difference between now and 5 years ago or 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Like, the only difference is now people are saying, oh, but it was recent. But you know what? Like, when the government announced that Blue Book came out, people were like, oh, look, it was recent. Like, we're still at the same place that we were. I said it on my Facebook post, like, you know, crappy, grainy film footage of a UFO, whether it comes from a guy in a field or the government, is still just crappy, grainy footage of a UFO. Like, give me some context. If you're going to disclose something, then disclose something. Don't keep feeding me a kernel at a time every 5 or 10 years. Show me what you have. And until someone is willing to do that, I I don't really understand why it's such a big deal. And I do think that it is obfuscation. I think it's a way to get people to look somewhere else. The United States is in a very tumultuous state right now. Like, who knows how our political system is going to go in the next couple of years. It's whether it be the tax bill or who's running the government or who's not running the government or corporations and their money influences into the government. Like, there's a lot going on in the world right now, and this was a great way. The second most viewed story on the New York Times for the past 4 days has been that UFO story. You would think that people would be more worried about if they're going to be able to, like, go to the doctor next year.
And the thing is, okay, so $22 million spent on advertising in television, magazines, the internet, etc., would not get the kind of press that they got from releasing the story. $22 million still is going to get you the second most viewed story on the NewYorkTimes.com, or that kind of feature where it's talked about on CNN and people come on each of the news stations. So you got to say, when it comes to the government, and everybody talks about how the government wastes our money all the time, whatever they were trying to accomplish with that story is $22 million well spent. Because here we are.
Absolutely.
We're all talking about it. And they may not have discovered UFOs, but they certainly changed the conversation to what they want us to talk about.
And there's a real weird psychological aspect too, to kind of do a callback to how we even started. How do you create a kind of branching system where it does seem like you have crazy people and it does seem like you have knowledgeable experts, right? So every time either the two of you or me or any of our peers in the community, if we were to go on television, whether, let's say, for a Roswell special for our local news or a Halloween special on ghosts for our local news, anytime any of us would have gone on television, they would have kicked off our interview segment by playing either the theme from Ghostbusters or the theme from the X-Files, right?
Yep.
Okay, right? But
Every single time.
But with this, the way to create division is now you've had multiple people on major news and cable stations, and they don't play the X-Files theme song. They don't play the Twilight Zone theme song. They don't play the Ghostbusters theme song. They bring them in as a knowledgeable expert in the field. That person will be looked at, more regarded, their opinion, than ours, because we're the silly people. We're the ones who have spent, our whole lives kind of down in the trenches trying to do some good work. And it was a good story that was in the New York Times. Leslie Kean shows up on CNN and talks about UFOs. They don't play the X-Files theme for her, so, like, there is a way to even create new branches of, well, this person's crazy, that person's not. Look at the difference in how we're treated even in the media.
Yeah, that's sobering.
And I think also, I like where you're going with that, because it also goes to show that the medium, is the message. To quote Marshall McLuhan there, it's like how you see it. When you see somebody talking in a talking head on TV, if they come on and it sounds like an entertainment segment, like it's going to be A.C. Slater talking about whatever new movie Ryan Reynolds is in or something like that.
Right.
Versus if it's going to be a news segment that frames the way you look at every single thing. And when people come, if somebody comes on and talks about UFOs and it's in that last 15 minutes of the news or that segment that's right after sports, people are gonna be like, oh no, this guy's funny. No, we want to watch.
That's the puff piece.
Right.
Yeah, that's the puff piece.
And so your placement in the newscast can be, can say as much and can have as much impact on the veracity or the perceived veracity of your story as almost anything else. And so it's hard not to be defeatist about the whole thing. And so I think it's good that even though we're we're challenging the fact that they released this at this certain time. What's the narrative people are trying to push? Tom DeLonge's out there trumpeting it, and anything that he trumpets kind of has the stench of BS about it somewhere in the back. Maybe because of his association with entertainment. Maybe it's because his band was mostly just power chords and fart jokes. But like all those things put together, just makes it. And I like Blink-182, but I like power chords and I like poop jokes. But the thing is that
I do too.
Full disclosure coming right now.
Yeah, I thought they were great.
Do you like poop jokes?
But but to what you're saying, like that's what's interesting, right? Because what you're seeing is again another part of the kind of cyclical process of these things revolving. Because in the 90s you had camps that broke into these warring factions. You had these people believe Bob Lazar, no, these people don't. It happened when the MJ12 documents came out. Yes, these people believe them, no, they don't. And then in the internal factions fought. So what you're going to see happen, and it's already started in the UFO community, is people who are on the side of Tom DeLonge, to the stars, we should really be invested in them and really interested in them, and then people saying be wary and be cautious of them. And now those two factions inside are going to fight, and that adds to the obfuscation of whether or not we get any answers, because now we're going to infight about this New York Times article for the next 3 years until something else drops, another little kernel, and then we can start fighting over that and say, well, I was right about it, you were wrong about it. And so it keeps the internal groups divided.
Right. So what should we do, John? I mean, what is the path that we should be taking to get out of this cycle?
So it really is like caution, like take your time, read the article. Okay, now read about the people in the article and read multiple things about the people in the article. Read things that you disagree with. Like as a person who researches UFOs, like I never wanted to know about the air intake scoop on a 1953 F9C Scorpion from Northrop Grumman. Like I didn't want to know about the mechanics, but I wanted to know what I was talking about, and I wanted to know every aspect of it. And so you have to be voluminous in what you want to know. And, so like the first thing, when Tom DeLonge announced to the stars and did like his big announcement that the website was starting and that you could back it, and he was talking about like I think Alonzo, which is one of the guys who is all wrapped up in this New York Times story. Like the first thing I started to do, because I was like, oh, I think I have a file about that guy. So who is he? So I like ran upstairs and I went in my cabinet and I pulled out my file on him, and there's this just a 5 or 6 sheets on him. But it was when he got fired from the Defense Intelligence Agency department that he had been worked in, because they were spying on American citizens without going through the proper channels to doing so. And so his agency got closed down for spying on people. And I was like, this might not be the greatest guy to have in your disclosure movement. Like he's already kind of tainted from working in a government organization that was going against like the kind of ways and means and checks and balances of how you should be treating Americans.
Right.
Now he's going to say, oh, I'm part of this savior group that's going to give you all the true information.
Mm.
And so it really is just about reading about the characters involved, looking at the context of how they're involved into it. What did they do before they were involved with this? And looking at the history of the movement. I mean, people would realize that it is like, I can't say it enough. Like it's a cyclical thing. It happens over and over again. Maybe it's because I've been doing this for 30 years that it's so easy for me to see, but like it's just happening again. And it gets really frustrating to tell people like, okay, it seems like it's huge and it seems like it's big and we all want disclosure and we want proof and we want evidence. If they announce tomorrow, I mean, this is what people have to be prepared for, and it's very sobering. If they announce at the end of this year that there are extraterrestrials that we are in communication with, people always say like the religions of the world would freak out. Maybe, but it fundamentally changes humanity for the rest of history. Our place in the universe, everything we know, everything that we will ever be will change. So you're telling me that you think, people who are like, oh, disclosure is imminent. It's going to happen at the end of the month. They're doing it before Christmas. They're going to do it next year on January 1st. Humanity is fundamentally going to change as we know it forever in the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks or a year. Like, that's just not how the power structures of the earth even work. Like, if it was going to happen, it would have happened. Nobody would control highly advanced extraterrestrial aliens that come to this planet. They're not cutting deals like a corporate CEO. They really aren't. I mean, you have stories about, the UFOs landed at an Air Force base and they made deals with Truman and to give him technology. And why? Why would they do something like that? I mean, the idea that a civilization of people who can traverse all of time and space and the inky blackness of the cosmos with some kind of technology that to us seems like magic, pull over to the side of the road at our planet and start cutting deals with one guy from one nation on this entire planet is nonsensical.
Well, now we've got the president who wrote the book on it.
Well, you have a point.
So he's just going to, I want disclosure to happen because I want Donald Trump to go off prompter when he releases the information. Like, as far as, I mean, yes, he might botch the whole thing, but the entertainment value alone of Donald Trump doing disclosure would be one for the books. So I'm saying,
these are the greatest aliens. They have the most massive ships.
They're huge.
They're huge. Their ships are huge.
Greatest ships in the universe, right here. We're gonna build them in Michigan.
The last person that you give any UFO information to is the president, though, right? I mean, in all honesty, a president is going to be in office the longest for 8 years.
Right.
Right. So you don't give him every single bit of information, especially if it's something about alien technology. I mean, even if he asks, I'm sure there are levels of security that even the president doesn't have. People don't want to believe that. But, the chances of a president even serving 8 years is rare. A double term for a president. Like that guy might only be in there for 4 years. You're going to give him the keys to everything that you have secret wise. If he's only going to be there.
Not.
Yeah, let's hope not, for sure.
Yeah, especially in the current case. So it sounds like you think, John, that there's never going to be disclosure. They're never going to disclose because it would change human history. Is this what I'm hearing?
I think that if I have to make a guess, which I have to,
we're going to hold you to it. Your feet are to the flames.
I think that disclosure has been happening. I think it's been happening for centuries. And I think it's happening in a way that an advanced civilization would disclose themselves to us. Slowly but surely, through the winding of the dark ages to today, we have psychologically become more equipped to deal with a culture that is unlike ours. The conversations have elevated. Our science has elevated. Our personal day-to-day interactions with each other have elevated in a way mentally where it seems to me like this is what disclosure is. Like it's not this massive bomb drop from a government agency that there's aliens. It's slowly the two of you start a show and someone else has a podcast and a blog going and someone else is writing a book and we're talking about it and we're discussing the ideas and we're constructing the ideas together. And it's revealed to you like reading a book. It's a page at a time. And the book is already there. It's just we're slowly reading it as a society. I think it's happening right now. I think that there are probably advanced civilizations interacting with us and have been. And I really feel like slow and steady wins the race. They're not in a rush, and we have things to do, and they would understand that, and that's how it's happening.
So you think that it's not the government, but whatever this alien intelligence is, be it extraterrestrial or ultra-terrestrial or what have you, it's revealing itself to us. And we're coming to it, kind of individually and as a society as well. And it's not coming top down. It's almost coming bottom up, I would think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that one of these things that's very possible with like these reveals that come out every few years is if there are people studying this phenomena and they're looking at the trends of what people talk about and believe, which they also have been studying as long as they've been studying flying saucers, what do people believe? They would notice that there has been an uptick for as long as there have been UFO sightings or, this type of phenomena that people have believed more and more. And it seems like the government uses this as a way to say, oh, yeah, we know about it. We've been studying it. Look at this. We're in control of it. That's something our society does. That's something.
So they just kind of jump on it and act like, oh, we've had a handle on this all along.
Yep.
We've already cut a deal. We've already there's a deal on the table.
We've known about this for a long time. Don't worry, we have it under control. We've got the best guys on it. The biggest guys, the best guys, the most massive guys working on this.
Top men.
They're huge.
But that's just something you say because what
else can you do?
What else can you do? And they like to be in control. They don't like to seem like they're at a loss for, well, we don't know what to talk about. We don't know how to address this issue.
So, John, let's talk about, what do you think what do you think is going on? What do you think these craft are? Are they extraterrestrial? Are they from another dimension? What is going on? What do you think?
And a good way to lead into that, actually, well, that's the big question. But a good way to lead into that question
it's huge.
Is what I'm interested. It's huge. What I'm interested in, John, is what's the as far as when it comes to maybe a UFO story or a story like that. What's the most believable one you've ever heard? I think would be a good way to start, or one that you're like, yeah, man, there's got to be something to this one. And that might color your perception of what you think is the truth behind the phenomena.
Yeah, I mean, the reality, and to be as truthful and honest as I can be about it, is the most mind-bending story is mine, is my sighting, is my experience, because I'm the person involved in it. I've talked to hundreds of abductees and hundreds of contactees and experiencers of all shapes and sizes for 30 years. But, there was that one night when I saw something that I couldn't explain. And I still don't know what it was exactly. And as I've read and become more knowledgeable, it's only become weirder and more deeper to me that these things exist. I don't think that you can find snippets of truth and you can look at jigsaw puzzle pieces from other people's experiences, but it's when you start to experience something. I think that's kind of what I was talking about when I was talking about disclosure. Like, is when people start to have their own experiences, that's how things are disclosed and revealed to them. That's when their eyes are cast open, is when they have that experience.
It's when disclosure is personal.
Right. And that's when it means the most. And so, when people are saying, I wish they would disclose, what they're saying is, I wish that they would make it so everyone else believes me. And I think that that's important to remember. Like, if you know that they're there and you know that something is going on, then you're okay. Like, oh yeah, I already knew that there are UFOs. I already know that there are ghosts. I already know that there are monsters and interdimensional beings and ultra-terrestrials. Like, I'm glad that you know about it now. That's what disclosure is. Okay, now you know about it. Now I'm not crazy, which permeates all of these fields that we investigate, right? Like, we talk to each other because we find our commonality in weirdness, and then we don't feel so weird. We feel connected to those around us in a much deeper way. Oh, thank goodness you had that same type of experience. And there's that release. And so I think if you're secure with your experiences, yes, of course you still want to share with other people, but the idea of disclosure isn't so transformative.
Because you've already been transformed. So I want to hear your story, John.
Yeah, that's what.
It was.
You wound up the pitch. Come on.
No, it was very very subtle. I was standing in an alleyway late at night. I was working a midnight shift, And I was out there smoking, standing in an alley on a Wednesday night in a darkened city. And I was the very clear night, and I was looking at the moon because it was one of those nights when you could see everything perfectly on the moon, just clear sky. And beneath it in the dark sky, there was just a shape. And I thought to myself, that bird is soaring in a very weird way. Like, that's a weird bird. It was the exact thought I had. And I never looked at it. I kept looking at the moon. And after it had probably gone a few inches in my line of sight, in my peripheral vision, I could see it underneath the moon. I thought to myself, well, it's really weird that someone is flying a kite this late at night. And I kept looking at the moon, and then I thought to myself, why isn't that plane making any sounds? And then kind of maybe a second or 2 seconds before it disappeared above the buildings, I finally stopped looking at the moon, and I looked right at it, and it was a kind of roundish triangle, but no sharp edges, and it was black, it was very big, and it was moving through this dark sky, but it was darker than the sky, which is how I could see it. And it kind of moved over the top of the buildings. I watched it silently disappear out of my sight, and then I turned back and I looked at the moon, and I thought, man, that was a really weird thing. I wonder what it was. And then 2 or 3 minutes later, snap. And I was like, holy shit, that was a UFO. Now here I am at the time. I mean, by that time, I had already been lecturing on UFOs for 10 years. And the thing that sold that sighting for me was that when it happened, the last thing I was thinking about was that it was a UFO. And I really feel like, and I've talked to tons of experiencers, contactees, abductees, tons of people who say that sometimes when you see things, it really does feel like there's a kind of mental block on you to not see it.
Absolutely. I would have to agree with that.
Yeah. And so, like, it's so mind-boggling to me that here I am, this guy who studied UFOs for 10 years, is watching a UFO. And the only things I'm thinking about is bird, kite, airplane. And then only after it's gone do I realize I've just watched this giant, crazy craft moving silently through the sky that has no traditional shape to be flying in our skies, that's a UFO. And I was like, oh, I just saw a UFO. And
yeah, I mean, when I think I've been doing this for a while, and I think after you do it for a while, you can get pretty jaded, because you realize, just how fallible people are in their descriptions, and if you're not having experiences yourself, then you kind of doubt everything. And I was at that point, and then thankfully I've been starting to have some of my own experiences. But what you say there about this mental block, and I'm not sure if it's the phenomena doing it. I more think that it's like our own inability, even though, I'm like really into this, right? When I see crazy stuff, it takes me a while to process it. I don't automatically just say, oh my God, look at that. I'm like, it's really strange. I've had things happen and didn't talk about them for days afterward.
I completely agree. And what's interesting, and if, we did have kind of a combinatorial field of study, like, we would realize that it happens to ghost people and it happens to cryptozoologists, that there's a moment where something extremely bizarre is happening and you're just standing there kind of glassy-eyed watching it happen. And then after it's over is when you go, holy shit, that was weird.
Yeah.
But you don't seem to really be able to process it at a time. Like you were saying, Allison, it's
a delay.
Yeah, it's such a paradigm shift that your brain is kind of locked up in what is happening to my reality right now.
And we're really programmed too to just go back to conventional reality. Oh, gotta go to work, and not to think about what just happened. I mean, that kind of gives me hope because, like I said before, I mean, I there's a time when I was really feeling very cynical about this stuff. And now I feel, I've had scant experiences. I haven't seen the mothership or anything like that, but you know, it's something I've seen things I can't explain now, and I can finally say that. But I've realized in that experience just how fleeting uh, these things are, and they don't often have like a predictable narrative. Like, we've kind of been trained into, with ghosts and UFOs that there's a certain narrative that you expect. And, if that's not there, I think it's hard for us to hold on to it. Again, it's also hard because, we are programmed to just see a certain part of reality and just to, kind of drone on to work. Um, and so I think a lot of people, I think there might be more people than we realize are having experiences like this. But, I'm supposed to be open to this. So this is supposed to be, my life's pursuit, and I still have problems with it. So that really gives me hope in a way, because I'm thinking, wow, this stuff could be going on all the time. And, if I just almost flush this stuff from my memory, you know, what is it like for, the common Joe?
For Joe Sixpack. Like,
For
what,
Joe
Yeah.
what
Sixpack.
happens to him?
I'm the
Yeah.
same way. I'm the same way because I'm a researcher and because I want to be even keeled about it. When a weird experience happens to me, there's a moment after that moment where I start to explain it away to myself.
Yeah, I've done that too.
And I forget, I talk about a lot of different things at my lectures, and I often forget that we're animals, right? And so when you were talking about being programmed, we're programmed as humans, but we are animals, right? So when I take a moment and I go outside and I'm sitting on my porch and I'm watching my non-human animal friends in the neighborhood, dogs and cats and squirrels and stuff like that. And I watch them react. Like, my analogy is when you watch a squirrel, it's eating its peanut on your back deck or on your front porch or whatever, and you move toward the door, maybe open it, and it catches the assumption that you're coming, right? It freezes and it has this look on its face. And you see it in dogs, cats, you see it in all animals that you might normally see, where their reality could, anything could happen at the next moment. Like, the look on their face is like, am I going to die? Am I going to fly? Am I going to be kicked? Am I going to lose this peanut? Do I have to run? Do I have to, like, it freezes,
Yeah.
just like we were talking about. Like, that's how we're supposed to be. We're supposed, when something happens, we are supposed to be like, oh, is reality about to shift? But because we've been programmed as humans, we're like, no, I have to get up to go to work tomorrow. We're already forward thinking past this weird thing that might be happening or this thing that's currently happening. We're making all these, millions and multitudes of judgment calls about things that, these experiences that haven't happened, when the kind of default position is that, oh, anything can happen right now. And we've lost that ability as humans for people to be able to do that. If you say, like, oh, it's possible, possible that you could see a ghost, and people are like, no, I've never seen a ghost. Like, you have to be open that reality is about to hand you a tsunami that you're not prepared for. And I feel like human beings kind of lose that sometimes. And it's kind of a beautiful way to be, like, to live in the moment like a squirrel or a dog or a cat, and kind of be like, oh, this is this weird thing that's happened to me. Someone just walked out, this giant creature just walked out on a porch and yelled at me. Like, that happened today, and now I'll go about the rest of my day. It's just really interesting, the psychology behind all of it. I doubt stuff, Allison, that happens to me all the time. I never will stop doubting it, because I know that
Yeah.
I know my brain can be tricked. I know that I'm a fallible human being.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's good to apply critical thinking, but I noticed that for a while I was really going too far the other way, where everything, and you don't want to do that either. You don't want to just explain away. And I think I've done that to an extent, and now I'm more like, nope. I know something happened. That was weird. That's never happened before. I compared it to this and that. Nope, it's a thing.
But for a long
I've
time,
started to realize there are things like that, and I'm really happy to be able to say that, because boy, I've torn things down like you wouldn't believe. And now there's certain things that I'm still holding on to.
But for a long time, we were just dealing with people who kind of were saying things all the time that felt unbelievable, or everything. Like, it wasn't just like one thing happened to them. Every single thing happened to them. And they didn't try to back up it with research or everything. And they were making money on it. So you just have a skeptical eye when you're like, well, I get this person's trying to sell something. So everything's real.
So John, like one of my experiences is I was asked to speak at a notoriously haunted place in Baraboo, Wisconsin. And so again, it's a place where the owner realizes that ghosts are good for business.
Right.
And that's great in a way, but I'm used to being in Milwaukee where, if you want a story, you got to pretty much pry it from somebody's dead hand. You know what I mean? It's like, it's like they're really ashamed of their ghost stories here. They're really worried about letting it out. And it's hard to get people to admit stuff. But then once you get it, it's like, wow, I really got something. When there are people who are like, oh man, this place is so haunted. It's a portal. We've got 20,000 ghosts. Yeah, it's really hard for me to really think that a place is haunted. So they asked me to come and do like a 2-hour lecture about weird stuff in Wisconsin. And so I got done with my lecture, and then we were going to do the podcast there. And so I had to set up, and I was like stowing my stuff under a table. And then I stood up, and what do I see flying at my head but a quarter-size white orb with my naked eye, and it flew past my ear. And I like looked, I'm like, what was that? And this is one of those where I didn't tell anybody. Even they had a documentary that was being filmed there, and I was interviewed for the documentary. You think I would have mentioned it then, or you think I would have mentioned it during the podcast, or you think I would have mentioned it when we were doing the so-called investigation, which I had problems with because I didn't think there were real investigative techniques happening, but that's just me. Anyway, I didn't tell anybody about it until that was a Saturday, until that next Monday when I called Mike and I said, oh, by the way, Mike, I did see something.
And I immediately gaslighted her. I was like, you didn't see nothing. Stop it with your hysterical stories.
You didn't. But I think I had a problem because I was like, this place is not haunted. How could it really be haunted? And then to top it all off, I see an orb, which, the whole orb thing has irritated me to no end over the years. But when you see it with your naked eye, I mean, that's something different. So that was one of my experiences, and just, going through the psychology of experiencing it and like the delay. And it's really interesting, like the stages that you go through. So, that's one of my personal experiences. And it has a little bit more of a narrative because it's kind of like a poke at me. It's kind of like, the spirits are telling me, get off your high horse and stop critiquing orbs so vehemently as you had, or something like that.
But it's funny because when you run into those people, and I'm sure we all have, where something happens to them every single day, or it happens to them 4 or 5 times every night, and you have to like, is that really happening that often to them? I tell people all the time, I do the podcast that I do, which is called Realm of the Weird. Mm-hmm. It's 14.
Which I love. I love it.
And people are always like, do more episodes.
Yeah, I
and I'm
know.
like,
that's what I was just going to say.
And I tell people all the time, like, it took 30 years to get those 14 stories.
Yeah. Because those are from your real cases.
Yeah. And like, those are the 14 or 15 weirdest things that have happened to me in 30 years. So like, when someone comes up to me at the end of the night and they're like, I have 172 EVPs tonight. Like I caught 52 ghost photographs tonight during the investigation. It's like, did you really? Like, I want to believe them, but I also have to get into that position where people say like, oh, can I show you this photo of my dead grandmother's ghost? And I have to be like, okay, but like, do you want it to remain being a photo of your dead grandmother's ghost, or do you want my honest opinion on what it could be?
Yeah,
because
that's hard.
and a lot of people will say like, oh well, don't look at it then, and that's fine. You know, the end. I wrote in a book once, if all of these things aren't real, if ghosts aren't real and there's no Bigfoot and Mothman and Chupacabra and Loch Ness Monster, none of those are real and there's no such thing as ghosts and there's no such thing as aliens and UFOs. If all we're doing is telling each other stories, that's fine. We're listening to each other. We're telling each other what we feel and how we think. If that's all of this is, and no one's hurting anyone, and we're just sitting around telling each other about the things that we think about and our concerns about this world and the afterworld and what might come next, that's beautiful, and I'm fine with it.
Well, it is beautiful, John, but I'm going to ask you to maybe tell us what you really think about, what are these creatures? I mean, what, you said that you're developing, these connections, this unified theory of the paranormal. What do you think is going on? What are these things that we're seeing in the sky, or what are these creatures that we see or interact with?
My kind of patented slogan, right, that I put on everything is what you think is weirder than you think. Like I say that at my lectures, I have it on a bunch of my websites. And the kind of philosophy behind that is that our reality is much wider than we experience, that there are more worlds and more colors and more sounds and more things than we might be capable of currently experiencing. And I think that every now and then they touch our reality or we get glimpses of them. And that's what these things belong to. They belong to a much, much wider and weirder reality than we're currently experiencing in this seemingly shared reality between each other. If there are beings from outer space that exist in this reality at the same kind of geometry that we exist in, that's fine. I understand that. I could see how the math would work on that there's biological beings just like us somewhere else out in the cosmos that might come and interact with us. I see how that's a possibility. If there's little biological creatures that we haven't discovered that live and hide on this planet somewhere, I'm fine with that. Or big ones, if they're Bigfoot, I'm fine with that too. But I also think that reality, that the universe, the cosmos, has never showed us anything. If it's ever shown us anything, it shows us that it loves diversity and it loves strangeness. It created colors and sounds and a multitude of animals on one planet and a multitude of chemical compositions and crystals and people all existing on one little planet. It loves strangeness. It loves just making things. And to believe that it didn't make strange things that we have a hard time understanding, that we have difficulty in discerning, I think is selling the cosmos short.
And I think that's a perfect way to end this interview, John. Let's just let's just hope it's more ET and less dreams in the witch house. That is the wider skew of reality. Okay, before we let you go though, we gotta get you to promise that when you do. So we just had our elves episode.
Yeah, we gotta talk about elves.
No, but we gotta save it. We gotta
talk about elves.
We gotta save it for when he's coming out. So when you eventually do your elves book or you release a new lecture or something like that, you gotta come back and give us the full skinny about whatever's going on up by you.
I absolutely will.
That sounds
great. I would love that. And speaking of rock stars, you're a rock star of the paranormal, John Tenney.
Absolutely. So,
thanks. I'm bad with compliments. Thanks.
All right. You're welcome.
We're gonna have links to all this stuff at othersidepodcast.com/176 is where you're gonna find this. But John, for the people who want to jump on their phone or jump on their computer as soon as they're done listening, where can they find you so they can get some of your stuff?
So my website is Weird Lectures. If they go to Facebook, it's facebook.com/Weird Lectures. Actually, I tell people the easiest way is go on Google and type Tenney, Tenney, and then weirdo after it. And then just follow all of those links straight into whatever crazed rabbit hole it leads you into.
All right, awesome. And
Thank you so much.
This is our last episode of 2017. So everybody have an awesome week before New Year. And John, we hope you have an awesome New Year too.
Thanks. Happy New Year. Thanks for having me.
Thank